The storm moved in with a kind of malice that didn't announce itself with thunder. It didn't have to. It came wrapped in a darkness that crawled across the surface of Lake Michigan like an ink stain, swallowing the horizon as daylight began to vanish behind a thick, slate-colored wall. Gusts of wind began to howl low and bitter through the steel catwalks and along the weathered deck of the Carl D. Bradley, as though the lake itself were whispering a warning no one could quite understand. The crew had seen storms before, dozens of them, but this one felt different, heavier, colder. 22-year-old Elmer Fleming was on the bridge when the first shudder came, not from a wave but from something deeper, almost like the ship had taken a breath and held it. He glanced to his left. The first mate's hand was frozen on the wheel, eyes fixed on the murky water ahead. Beneath them, 623 feet of freighter groaned as if uneasy in its own frame. The steel bulkhead trembled. Then it happened again. This time, harder. A strange echo, like a question asked by the ship's bones. Fleming didn't know it yet, but the Carl D. Bradley was already breaking apart. She had once been the Queen of the Lakes. Launched in 1927, the Carl D. Bradley was a towering vessel of white and black steel, built to haul limestone across the Great Lakes to the steel mills of the Midwest. At over 600 feet long, she had been the largest freighter on the lakes for over 2 decades, a behemoth in her prime. But by 1958, her crown had tarnished. She was showing her age. Welds were cracking. Steel was fatigued. Some crewmen whispered about rust below the waterline, hairline fractures in her hull. But shipping was money, and the fall season was running out. She'd been pressed into one more run before layup. That run would be her last. On November 18, 1958, the Carl D. Bradley had finished unloading limestone at Gary, Indiana. Her next stop was supposed to be her home port of Rogers City, Michigan, a tight-knit town that had supplied most of her crew. She wasn't carrying cargo this time, just ballast. Her hull rode high in the water. Her engines pushed her forward at a steady 14 knots. The wind was already turning by mid-afternoon. Lake Michigan was beginning to stir beneath her, rolling in long swells that slapped her sides like wet thunder. The forecast warned of gale-force winds. But Captain Roland Bryan, a seasoned man with nearly 30 years of experience on the lakes, wasn't overly concerned. He had sailed through worse. Everyone on board had. Besides, they were only hours from home. Around 5:30 p.m., about 12 miles southwest of Gull Island, the storm hit in full. The lake exploded into a chaos of 25-foot waves and horizontal sleet. The sky was black. The radar screen turned into a blur. Above deck, water rushed over the bow with terrifying force. Down below, in the engine room, crewmen felt it first, not in sight or sound, but in sensation. A deep vibration, an unnatural shift, and then a crack. Sharp, metallic, like a bone snapping under tension. Fleming had barely taken 2 steps before the ship heaved unnaturally and seemed to bend at the center. The hull twisted with a groan so loud it drowned out the wind. Within seconds, the deck began to split. The stern was still moving. The bow was not. The Carl D. Bradley was breaking in half. Panic broke like lightning across the crew. There was no time to radio a full distress signal. The captain managed to get off a short mayday. "Mayday! Mayday! This is the Carl D. Bradley! Mayday!" But the message was garbled and brief. Within minutes, the bow and stern separated completely. The forward section, carrying the pilot house and bridge, began sinking nose first. The stern stayed afloat a little longer, its engine still humming as if unaware it was no longer attached to anything. Men scrambled for life jackets. 2 lifeboats were launched. One capsized almost immediately. The other, an open raft, bobbed aimlessly in the towering swells. 23 men plunged into the freezing water, their cries ripped away by the howling wind. The temperature was near freezing, the water colder still. Rescue operations didn't begin in earnest until after dark. The Coast Guard cutter Sunken, stationed in Charlevoix, was dispatched immediately, but Lake Michigan's fury slowed every effort. By the time they reached the area in the early morning hours of November 19th, the storm was still raging. The Bradley was gone. All that remained was debris, and then, astonishingly, a flare. 2 men, Elmer Fleming and Frank Mays, were found alive, clinging to the single open raft. Both were barely conscious. Both had spent more than 14 hours exposed to brutal wind and icy water. Their bodies were covered in ice, their hands frozen to the railings. The other 33 men were never seen again. Rogers City awoke that morning not to the whistle of the Bradley returning home, but to silence. One by one, families gathered at the docks. Many refused to believe it. Radios flickered with rumor, false hope, half-formed lists. The town was small, fewer than 4,000 residents, and nearly every household had someone aboard. Fathers, sons, uncles, neighbors. The losses rippled like shockwaves through every street, every school, every church pew. Of the 33 men lost, 23 were from Rogers City. The funerals were held over days, some without bodies to bury. In one instance, 6 coffins were lined in a row, each representing a man who had vanished beneath the waves. The town's entire character seemed to change. Businesses closed early, voices fell to a hush. Lake Michigan became a thing to be feared. It had always been a force, but now it had become something else, something with memory, something that had taken, not given. Questions quickly arose about why the Bradley had been sent out at all. Internal documents and past inspections showed that the ship had experienced structural issues before. There had been cracks, reinforced patches, metal fatigue. The vessel was overdue for a full refit, and instead had been sent into one of the most unpredictable lakes in North America during late November, an infamous time for shipwrecks. Investigations confirmed what the crew had feared. The Carl D. Bradley had been slowly dying from within. Her hull had become compromised. Her center plates, some of which dated back to her construction 3 decades earlier, had been strained past their limits. The storm didn't cause the disaster, it exposed it. One of the most damning discoveries was that newer ships on the lakes had been using high-strength steel and improved design methods for years, while the Bradley had remained essentially unchanged since the 1920s. She was an aging queen dressed in rust, coasting on reputation. Frank Mays, one of the 2 survivors, would spend the rest of his life telling the story. He described the moment the ship split as like the snapping of a toothpick, fast, clean, and final. He spoke of the water swallowing his crewmates, of the silence that followed, of the guilt of survival. Every year, he returned to Rogers City for memorials, for the bells, for the names. In 2007, the wreck of the Carl D. Bradley was explored with high-resolution cameras. She lay on the bottom of Lake Michigan in 2 distinct pieces, 360 feet apart, her bow upright, her stern twisted on its side, both eerily intact, as if still waiting. Today, the memory of the Carl D. Bradley endures in Rogers City, not just as a tragedy, but as a cornerstone of identity. A town that once built ships now honors the dead lost to one. Every November, the bell tolls 33 times at the Great Lakes Lore Maritime Museum, once for each man lost, and once more for the town that mourned them. They say the Great Lakes never give up their dead, that they keep their secrets in silence, miles below the waves. But in Rogers City, the names are not forgotten. They are spoken, sung, etched in granite. They echo in classrooms and dinner tables. They live on in the rhythm of waves breaking against a quiet shore. The Carl D. Bradley did not simply sink. She broke the heart of a town and left behind a silence louder than any storm. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.